What's up, everybody? It's your boys from S3. We're back. We're here with Tim Neely. We're going to be schooling you guys on how to take your money-sucking car hobby and turn it into a money-making car hobby, maybe. What's up, guys? I'm Jonathan. I'm the editor of S3 Magazine. Mike, the business-minded guy behind S3 Magazine. Tim Neely writes for S3 Magazine, also does a bunch of his own things. You might know him from Motor Vice, which is like the 80s, 90s vibe car shows. Tim's Enthusiast Garage, you need to check that out. And you need to check that out because what he does is basically buy and sell cars. And a lot of them are in a weird range. And what I think is really cool about what Tim does is he collects cars and he turns cars and sells them for a profit usually. But it's not necessarily like our parents did it where everything was old and European. Tim kind of looks at different cars. And I'll let him get into that. A lot of them are strategic in what he buys, cars that are at the bottom of depreciation curves. He'll explain what all that is. So the basic premise tonight is talking about, look, if you're buying a collector car because you want to have it in your house like a Rolex watch on display, that's lame. If you're trying to justify a car that you really want by its possible collectability in the future, that's rad. And it gives you like this surge of energy kind of when you know what I mean? I know Tim knows what I mean. When you know, like, man, I really want this car and I think I can justify it, that makes buying and having and driving and maybe modding cars that much more fun. I guess without further ado, Tim, do you want to talk about like your strategy? Explain the depreciation curve, because I think once people start thinking like that, it really opens a lot of ideas.
So every car, like when it's born, and this is a lot of what I talk about on my channel, and a lot about we did a podcast about this maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, where we kind of got into some good buys at the time. I actually just did a video on my channel about the 5 cars that I think you should buy right now, which I'll get into here as well. And I think there's stuff in every price range. There's my latest video, it was like $0 to $5,000, $6,000 to $10,000, 10 to 25, and then 35 to 70. So it was like pretty much no matter where your budget was, there was something that you could drive and enjoy and potentially definitely not lose money on, but probably double your money, triple your money, in the best case scenario, maybe quadruple your money. Every car when it's born, is at a set price. So whether it's a $40,000, CTR, or it's a $15,000, $22,000 Fiat Abarth, or whatever, it starts here and then it quickly kind of cascades down and down and down. And if it's like an ultra luxury car, those lose half like the first year. Like they go from 100 to 50, and then kind of a slower descent. But everything kind of descends, loses value. And there's a sweet spot where the car is still, a viable option. In other words, it's not like a barn find, but it's like a newer, it can be from newer car to whatever, but there's always a bottom. Like, a good example is about a year ago, 996s, Porsche 996s were at the bottom. About a year ago, Mark II Volkswagens and like EG hatches, we're kind of at the bottom. And now you're kind of seeing those start to tick up, climb up. Because what happens is eventually there's not very many of a specific car left, because cars are kind of viewed by a lot of people, not necessarily by us, but by a lot of people as like consumables. So they buy it, they drive it for 2 or 3 years. That's the sort of lease strategy is you want something new, you want to enjoy it while it's under warranty or whatever. We don't care about warranty. We want to throw a big turbo on it and stuff. So So that depreciation curve, there's a sweet spot, and I just figured it out when I was came from a really poor family, but I figured that out. I loved cars, so I figured out, like, I see these cars, drop to like where they're $5,000, and then 5 years later that car is $15,000, and then it's $20,000, and then it's $50,000, and so there's been enough of this, and I've been doing this for 20 years now, and so I've been fortunate enough to just flip and flip and flip. And some of the examples would be like, last year I was at an auction and a 94, I can't even remember what year it was now, but 94 Legend rolled up on the auction block, and it was like a one owner trade, unbelievably good car. And, I paid maybe 10% of what it was worth. And so just knowing that market and kind of being aware of that, you can, every one of us would like to own well, maybe not every one of us, but would like to own a clean Acura Legend or some interesting car. There's no Acura Legends left.
Yeah.
LS 400 or, even Miatas now are on the way back up. And so,
well, I think what happens with those enthusiast type cars like the Porsche, the 911, I know it happened to, and the Miatas and stuff, 944s even, they all turn into race cars.
Yep.
Yeah.
For a decade or more, and then all of a sudden it's like, holy crap, where are they all? They're all
gone.
They're all gone. And then you see the prices skyrocket. You start to see people try and turn race cars back into street cars.
Look no further than the Nissan 240s. Who would have ever thought that those things would be valuable? But the fact that people have been destroying them for so many years straight now, and they're kind of rare, especially to find one that hasn't been beat the crap out of. All of a sudden you find an S13 that's in like okay shape, no motor, no transmission, $8,000. What the hell? But it's because it's rare. That's simple economics.
Yeah,
for sure. There's 240 SXs, and there's examples in every whether you like European or you like Japanese or you like classic American. This week I've looked at almost everything you can think of. This week I sold a Honda Beat, which is a JDM import. I looked at a 65 Thunderbird, which is weirdly, those cars have everyone that thought those cars were worth money like died. So now like 65 Thunderbirds are cheap again. They're like at the bottom of their curve.
That's
again.
interesting.
And it's like a car that like is for what you get. Now it's definitely that's a niche market, but there again, there's a lot of pretty decent buys on those 390 Thunderbirds, and that's not even my jam. But who doesn't want to rock a classic Americana from time to time? So I think you just got to keep your eyes open if inherently, because you love car. All of us who are listening to this podcast love cars. Cars, eat, sleep, breathe cars. You kind of just have the ability to know when there's a good deal. As far as like Mike asked before we started, like kind of what I do, a lot of what I do is troll on the internet. And a lot of times the stuff that I've bought most recently, the last probably 5 or 6 things that I've bought or that I've made offers on, like I've got an offer out right now on a 944 Turbo that's one of 3 in the color combo, and I'll probably end up with that car. But it's weird when so one of 2 things happens. If an individual decides to sell a car, they decide, you know what, I want my next car, and this car it's time to jettison and get it out the door. That's one thing. And you want to see if they've had it listed for say 120 days. They want to sell. They want to sell this car. They're done with this car. Same with a dealer. Most dealers have floor plans, and no matter how right they are in the car, it kind of doesn't matter. You've got to turn that inventory. Eventually. So, and if you've got the money, you hold all the cards essentially. And so, with my Maserati Grand Sport, it was a car that had been on a lot for a long, like it had been in their inventory for like almost 200 days. And it was the last day of the year, which for dealers, they want to really, because they got to pay taxes on stuff that they've held across the year. And so I offered $20,000, about $20,000 less than what they were asking, and got the car. Oof. And so that car I've enjoyed.
hang on. Now, how do you do that? What is your strategy? I know that you know a lot about a lot of cars, which is this is a game and you have to know the rules, right? So like that would be advice to people. But like, how do you just have the balls to approach a dealership and say, yeah, I'm gonna offer you 20 grand.
So I think you can't be too in love with the car until you have it. So I think for me, when I'm on the hunt, I try to get enough in love with the car that I want it, but not enough in love with the car that I'm depressed for 6 months if I don't get it. Yeah. So like with that car, there were several that I was looking at, and that particular one, it had under 20,000 miles, and it had just had a clutch service, and like everything that it checked all the boxes. And I just honestly, I didn't really want to spend that much money at that point, but it was so cheap. I was like, what's the number that if they accepted it, I would not be able to say no. And I just picked that number. And so I think there's part of it. I come from I've done a lot of sales over the years. And so you can't really be afraid of having someone say no. Right. I mean, you're going to hear no. You're not going to get every car that you try to buy. And you kind of get, I've got a rhythm to it now where I kind of, like cars that I'm probably going to, hope to pick up this week. There's a 944 Turbo. That's going to be maybe a go to the collection car. There's a RX-7 convertible 1989 that is probably going to be a bring a trailer thing. There's a wagon that I bought before the end of the year that I paid $5,000. I probably shouldn't say this on this podcast, but it's okay. I got a really good deal on this wagon. It's going to go to bring a trailer. And so I think that it's that sort of thing. It's like you want to enjoy these cars and you want to have that, because a lot of us look at these Instagrammers or whatever and are like, man, how do they live this life? I think a lot of them are churning and burning on cars, or are, most people aren't like just ridiculously wealthy. I'm not like ridiculously wealthy, but I've chosen to set aside some funds that rather than investing in a 401k, so those funds multiply via cars.
Well, and I have noticed that guys that are listening, like, some of my dad's generation of car buddies that do collect, the money stays in a separate car collecting pot. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so they've started from the bottom, like most people have, or somewhere, and they've built cars and they've sold cars. And, I have one of my dad's buddies, like Porsche wanted to buy a Porsche from this guy. Wow. So like, yeah, they wanted it back and they were going to get it. So, and the guy gets like astronomical money. And I'm trying to get my head around like, oh my gosh, how, you make that kind of money. What does that feel like? And he goes, well, it's the pot. It goes back in and then I invest in something else or something else I've always wanted. You know what I mean? And so he's like, basically the car collecting money stays in the car collecting little account over here. And that's the way that they roll. So, it seems insurmountable at the beginning, but if you kind of build over generations or whatever, eventually you get to that point.
That's how Jay Leno did it. He's talked about it numerous occasions, but
that in a talk show that makes
no, he didn't use any of his he didn't use any of his talk show money. So he only used, he has never bought a car with talk show money. He's bought all of his cars. He's real proud of this if you ever meet him. It's like he tells everybody the story. So, I know that a lot of people probably heard this, but he only used his comedy money. So like when he would do a stand-up or whatever, all of that, he had a deal with his wife, like all of my stand-up money, once they kind of got to where they were, not broke, the stand-up money went into the car fund. That's and cool. So, he made a lot of great car decisions. And when you're buying McLaren F1s for $700,000 and then they're worth $14 million, you don't have to make a ton of great decisions before. You only have to do that once or twice. Yeah. And so for me, it's more like, just to give people hope, literally I started with like $1,500, $3,000. and trade after trade after trade. There was a 944 turbo that right at the beginning, before those kind of popped, before they went crazy, that I bought. Again, I'm a little fuzzy. I'd have to look it up, but I either paid $6,500 or $7,500 for it and sold it for $25,000. So if you do that once, all of a sudden, that's at that time in my life,
a cool car in the process while you have it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I drove that car to Formula One. I just found a really cool picture of that car at the 01 or 02 Formula One race with me and a bunch of friends. And so, I mean, that car ended up having great stories for me and then having great stories for someone else. And that guy that bought that car probably sold it for $35,000.
Yeah.
I mean, it just.
Well, and I think the moral is like, you've got to live it, and I think a lot of our readers in the magazine, they do live it. And then there's a lot that are on the verge of like, man, I really want to go all in, but I've got the world pulling me, telling me to grow up or whatever. But like, I attribute a lot of S3's success and the cars that I have now and stuff like that, just from, I'm so immersed, I'm so like involved in this and living it, that things happen and you start to learn things about. I don't know everything about any car, but I know a lot about a lot of cars. You know what I mean? I know a lot, like surface, deeper than surface stuff about a lot of different cars. And so I think the first step, guys, listening, is that, you really need to, like when you're up at night, whatever, playing online, like turn this into a game. Realize that already. There's a lot of things that and you just haven't like made it conscious. Like I guarantee you a lot of people out there know, like you just get a vibe of when certain cars are the right time to do certain things. Like my 911, and I'll share prices just because I think it inspires people. Like that car came my way through, somebody went to my dad, they were selling this 79 911. It was $8,500. My dad's initial thing is, man, $8,500, you can get at least 12 for that, like today. And this was 6-7 years ago or whatever, before the 911s went up. And then he called me and he said, I know you're about to have your first child, and this makes me a terrible father for even putting this in your head, but this guy came to me with this car that he wants to, he's an old ex-fighter pilot, and he just can't get in the car anymore. He was in like his later 80s.
Wow.
Yeah, and he was an
awesome
guy, man. He had it since 85. A buddy of his had brought it in from the military, had shipped it from Germany and everything. So anyway, $8,500. My dad had convinced him he can get 12 in a day, and then he goes back to this guy the next day and says, hey, about that $8,500, my son would really like to have that car. And the guy was like, well, that's what I want. That's what's important. I want somebody that's going to have the car and enjoy the car. And I know Porsche's part of your family and all that kind of stuff. So just tell them, sell whatever cars, because I had to sell a couple cars to come up with $8,500, and he was like, just tell him, go ahead and sell it. I'll hold it for him. But I got off topic. But the point is, I just had a feeling. I mean, those cars had been $8,500 to $10,000 for a long time. And I had always been in the mindset of like, but my Eclipse will just walk all over those things. Why would I want to mess with that old Porsche? And then I felt a tide change. I felt that kind of change in the air. And I was like, man, I feel like I need to get this car. I feel like it's the right thing to do, and I need to do it now before I have a child, as dumb as that sounds, because afterwards, who knows, So, I got the car, $8,500, and within a year and a half after that, it was 30. Now I think now I would say 35 is fair for that car, and I wouldn't sell it for 35, honestly.
Maybe more.
Yeah, maybe more. It is.
I get hit with 911s are stupid, man. I get hit with expensive prices on 911s.
Yeah, and it's tobacco metallic, which is it's like
it's the color.
It's brown. And it's hot right now, and it's the one that if the right person sees it would be like, I want that one. But that's all part of it. That's all part of the collectability game. When I first saw that car when we were on the way, I was like, what color is it? And my dad was like, I don't know. I was like, why don't you be stupid brown or something? And then I saw it, and it was brown. I was like, figures. Wait a second. That's actually pretty awesome, And so, I mean, just following my gut. And I really didn't come out of pocket for that car. I sold 2 broken cars that I thrashed to get fixed, got them fixed and sold them off. And, the only downside for somebody like me is where I fail at this collecting game, I keep everything. So like the smart thing would have been to sell that car a year ago or something like that, a year and a half ago. I didn't do it because I know that if I sell that car, I can't buy it again. You know what I mean? Like if I
will say for me, I'll say this, that I usually try to buy certain cars and have like the goal is to sell the car. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'll buy cars though, and the goal isn't to sell the car necessarily. The goal is to really love the car, enjoy the car as much as I can.
Right.
And something happens when you really love a car that, like with my 911, the 996, I loved that car, and I was not interested in selling it at all. Well, all of a sudden, it almost made it more desirable to people in the Porsche club. Like it was like, man, Tim's car, like the spec of it was really unique, and it was like there's not another one. So I mean, the numbers just kept creeping up and creeping up. And if I would have kept it, it would only be worth more now than even when I sold it. And so for me, like I never ever wanted to sell my V8 Esprit ever. Like the last thing I wanted to do was sell that black car. I mean, I literally worked with 1552 for like a year to get those concave tarmacs.
Right.
It's still the only, I mean, they're so expensive because they're forged and it's a one-off CAD file. Like, that stuff is, that's like lunatic stuff. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden you end up with this money in the car. Well, then the car's worth, that car had a life of its own. I started getting like messages like, hey, I'll buy it for this. I'll buy it for this. And the people that had the car, that had the money to buy that car, like also had, like crazy money. Like the people I was talking to were like, their other car was a Senna or, like real crazy. Yeah. So, all of a sudden that car was worth not to just one buyer, but potentially multiple buyers, like more than any other Esprit, like probably not the record, but there's one that sold for more, but like the highest priced Esprit, in the world, literally on earth. So, and I think that something happens like with your 911. I mean, I think the more there's, magazine coverage or the more you show up to shows and it's just like, clear that there's such a deep love, the worst case scenario is you get to own this amazing car for the rest of your life. The best case scenario, or the same, maybe even the same level of goodness is like someone walks up to you and is like, that car is just literally, I love the story. I like, your part you've played in the car. I like everything about it. Here's, $60,000. And at that point, you may even for that, you'd be like, well, and that's kind of where I'm at. Is like, most of the cars. I had someone recently try to buy my yellow Coupe Quattro. I looked at kind of where the market was. Those have probably tripled in value since I bought it. And honestly, even at triple what I paid for it, I'm not really interested in selling it.
Yeah.
It's not particularly
you ever get that, like like when you get a high offer on your car, just the offer is so rewarding that it makes you not want to sell it. You know what I mean? It has this weird, although Mike always says I'm allergic to money. But yeah, if somebody were to go, I'll give you $60,000 right now for the car, I'd be like, now wait. This means a lot to me, even more if I refuse your $60,000.
Yeah.
What other investment could you take $8,500 and turn it into $60,000? Come on.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But that's the thing. What Mike's talking about is what other investment could we take $8,500, turn into $35,000 in a few years, and get to drive a 911 in the process?
That's what I'm saying. Consistently, you can't. Like first stocks. I mean, people so like you could do stocks and day trade. Okay. I don't particularly. I'm not good at that. I've tried it. I mean, I've made. You can make some money doing that, but the fun of the cars I own currently, it's like the list of stuff is just, when I think about it, it's my personal list. So for a lot of the listeners, it might not be that list, but for me, it would literally, I remember playing Gran Turismo 1 and Gran Turismo 2 and just building this garage and being really good at Gran Turismo. And all of a sudden you've got, 50 cars in your garage, and it's like the baddest FTO and the baddest R32 and all these things. And so I have the R32 that I always wanted from Gran Turismo. That's in my real life garage, and it's parked next to the Maserati that I always wanted. It's parked next to the Lotus. It's parked next to all these. So I literally have built the Gran Turismo garage in real life. Now it may not be the same for everyone else, but like every one of those cars, like what I've paid for the car, it is radically below what the car is worth because of what we started this conversation with, is understanding that depreciation curve. And you called it what did you say with you got a feeling, or you felt a vibe with your 911? There is like a tingle, like this RX-7. When my son showed it to me, I was like, oh, I'm going to buy that car. Right? Just because it's like it's the last one that survived. Like, that's what
I feel like people need to learn to listen to that, because as car guys, we all have it. But sometimes you don't know how to speak that language of the tingle. You know what I mean? And when as dumb as it sounds, like I've got this F-150 that you guys might have seen it on social media. It came my way. I got it for $1. Well, I'll give you 10. That's what I mean. I'm not in love with the car yet. But the response of people, I got a text from the marketing guy at Koenig Wheels that was like, blah, blah, blah. Oh, by the way, dude, that truck is sick. And it's coming from all over. The marketing guy at Holly, that truck is sick. He's like, you thought about bringing it to SEMA, maybe with Holly? I'm like, what? Have you seen it? It's not there. But like, you can feel this energy around the car. And I know the square body Chevy trucks have already shot up, which is a whole different topic of like, now we're in a era where it's not only just the old European cars that are valuable, it's the 4x4s and the trucks and the import.
Roadmasters, Buick Roadmasters,
weird stuff,
crazy stuff.
2000 Trans Ams are taking off and stuff. Like, there's a lot of weird stuff happening. It's not just the old
Firebird formulas. I just looked at this Firebird formula. I might end up with it too, but like, there's so many cars where it's like that cars that were $5,000 or $3,000 forever, all of a sudden are $25,000, and you can still find them for $5,000. I'm not I can't buy them all. So what I'm saying to the whether it's 10 people listening or 1,000 people listening or whoever sees this, I've said this now for like 2-3 years, because I definitely don't feel like knowledge or wisdom or anything is never something that I've ever wanted to hide or keep for myself and be like, oh, I figured this out, like screw all y'all. It's not like that. I mean, it's literally like, man, I'm like really, really fortunate, because again, I drive I have the coolest 401k. I'm not saying I think that it's a good idea to have savings and mutual funds, and I mean, essentially we kind of are giving financial advice here. So it's like, I'm not suggesting take all of your money and put it over here. But I do think the guy that started Axis Wheels and he started Klaus Ettenberger Corporation is a guy named James, and I met him years and years ago. He probably doesn't even remember it, but we're like associates. I wouldn't call us friends, but we're social media friends. And he started with nothing. He just shared this story yesterday on his Facebook page, where he was fortunate, finally saved up all this money, got this BMW 850 manual transmission back in the day, like back when they were new. Yeah. And really he was working a job, making good money, but he felt like he needed to go out on his own and do his own thing and start, a wheel company or do whatever. And so he sold that car, and for the first 2 years, he drove a Tacoma with no air conditioning and no radio. Nice. And I think there's something to be said for, sometimes you do need to go all in. So if you're hearing this and you're like, okay, like I've got that tingle. I get it. When I see that car, I know like it is worth more. I would encourage you, like if it's an Integra or it's a whatever, and you're confident that like that car is worth, $15,000 and I can get it for $3,500. You should get it for $3,500, and you should not sell it until it's really close to whatever your goal is. If it's 15,000 is your target, you should set a goal. Say 12,000. I'm big into like, you got to write this stuff down, and you gotta hold yourself to it and say, Like my thing was I was going to have an Esprit by I was 25, and I did, but I wouldn't have if I hadn't hustled and I hadn't, sort of listened to I don't know, whatever that inner voice of like, buy
I'm
this
totally
car.
opposite. I'm with you on the inner voice, but the writing stuff down. No, I'm just like a
Mike writes stuff down.
I'm in a dude in the inner tube.
I'm a list guy.
Yeah. I'm basically the dude in the inner tube floating down the river.
If you
just
combine,
going, this.
If you combined you and Mike, you get me. I mean, essentially, like I'm kind of down the middle of.
Theoretically, if you combine me and Mike, you should be able to have a pretty successful company.
You'll be super creative, and really damn smart and handsome. Tim, I got a quick question.
Yeah.
On average, how long are you keeping these cars before you flip them for a profit?
Yeah, is there a number or is it just?
So there's two different things. There's a short and there's a long.
Okay.
I think mostly what we're talking about is for what we talked about earlier. We talked about cars that are kind of coming out now, or cars that are, I don't think if you want to make a couple $1,000s, you can do a really intelligent buy on like a 996 or any of these 80s and 90s cars, trucks, vans, anything that's like a survivor from that era. You can probably buy intelligently if you're right on the money and make $1,500 or $2,000 short. On the long, like the Lotus or the 911, older 911, there's certain cars that I've bought and where I've kind of cashed in is the long. And so the short would be you buy a car, say you buy a $3,500 car, like the Legend was a good example. So that Legend I mentioned first, that was a car. My goal was to sell it in 30 days. I sold it in like 60 days, or it's maybe closer to 75 days. What I bought it for and what I sold it for, my target was $7,500, and I think we sold it for, we like almost tripled our money. So it wasn't.
What did you buy that car for?
Like $1,800. Okay. I mean, it was like you couldn't replicate that deal. So that would be a short, and it would be a pretty successful short. A long would be like that 944 I referenced earlier, where I bought that car and enjoyed it for maybe 2 years while it went up in value, kind of, and I didn't really, it had been maintenanced and serviced, so there wasn't really any. I think I had the wheels refinished so that they looked good. I put a set of, I think either rough or ATS roof, I guess you probably say, but a set of other wheels that I liked on it. I think I might have lowered it too, but then I took a picture set that was like totally stock and the way I liked it, posted them both. And that car, again, 2 years, but what did I make? So that's double, triple. So almost quadrupled my money on that car.
Right.
Yeah.
So
another thing that you guys need to know about Tim is he knows every problem with every car ever. I can call him and be like, 2011 BMW 550, whatever, and you'll be like, oh, well, that one has an issue with his pool of knowledge is insane. And you also use that, right? Not to make you sound like too shrewd, but I've heard you telling me on the phone, like, you use that knowledge. I don't want to say to scare sellers, but just to explain to sellers maybe a little. I think, didn't you do that on like a 500 SL or something where you was like, now listen, man, I don't know if you know, but this car has this issue, this issue.
Oh, you always got to know.
If that goes wrong, it's going to eat you, man. And all of a sudden trying to sell your car for $5,000 is going to turn into having to put 10 into it. You know what I mean?
That was a good example. That's a good example of a short. So a buddy of mine called me, this is last year. We're about to do this again. In fact, I've been shopping for this car again this year. Is the $2,500 challenge. So my buddy was like, hey, let's buy $2,500 cars by this weekend and then take them on a 2,500 mile road trip. So on Wednesday, he calls me and tells me this. By Friday, I had the car. And so it was, I found the exact right car, the exact right buyer. But that car broke on the trip, not because it was inherently a bad car, but because it we hit a road debris and it took out the fuel pump assembly essentially in the middle of South Dakota.
Right.
And so, but even fixing that car, I still sold it to a friend, and he knows this because he's watched the episode of Tim's Enthusiast Garage and knows I paid $2,500. I think I put $300 in the fuel pump, and sold it to him for $4,200. So that was an example of a short where bought the car on Wednesday, drove it 2,500 miles over the weekend, sold it 3 weeks later, and made a little bit of money. Not like a crazy amount of money, but for some people, and including myself, I mean, who couldn't use an extra grand or two? So and everybody, I mean, I think what I'm saying is like, all of us could do that. I mean, you guys could do the $2,500 challenge and probably sell it for $4,000, whatever that goal target is. Now, you could buy a $2,500 car and on the short sell it for 10 grand. But if you're trying to do this like vocationally, like actually do it as a job, which I'm not suggesting you should, but if you were trying to do that, it's hard. It gets hard to really be picky and choosy. Like if at some point you just have to buy something. When I first started doing this, it was actually for 5 or 6 years, all I did was sell cars, and it got really hard. And you end up buying something that like you don't have that feling about. You know what I mean? The book says the number's right, so you buy it, and then you're not really passionate about it. And I just never enjoyed that. Like to me, that's just being car dealer guy.
It may as well be stocks at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, okay. You were talking about earlier the depreciation curve, and just to recap in case you guys missed it, like every car has an initial value. That value is going to go down, and then if it's the right car, it'll go back up. So what cars right now do you think are at the absolute bottom of that little roller coaster dip and are about to go back up? Like, what do you have your eyes on right now?
So right now, a lot of different stuff I mentioned, stuff I didn't mention. So like that RX-7 that I'm looking at.
Which is an FC, right?
FC, not the FD. The FDs are kind of weird. Although FD imports, FD JDM stuff is ridiculously undervalued relative to FD, cars that were brought in for this market. So like there's so much stuff available. I would encourage everybody that's into JDM, actually import it yourself. Like get to know someone that's over in Japan that goes to the auctions every week and know, because the difference in what you can buy the stuff for over there and import it yourself and have like $1,200 in fees versus buying something from someone else that's imported it and giving them essentially $5 or $6 grand in profit. Like you can do this, so you can import a car. So that's one thing. But yeah, the FC RX-7s there's so few nice ones left that like when you see those are kind of no-brainers. 500 SL Mercedes are dirt cheap. They're they're right on that cusp of when they break out, they're going to break out pretty aggressively.
Anything AMG, right? You're a big AMG.
Anything AMG, AMG stuff.
Because they tank, man.
Yeah,
like they're cheap.
The European thing is always interesting because they tank so hard, and when the bottom of the depreciation curve is so low on those cars, like you would never think that an $80,000 car could be $3,000, but
within like 10 years.
Yeah, but it happens, and it's a real brief time, and then they kind of creep up. Now, again, on the short, it's not like you're going to buy one of those cars and then next year quadruple or triple. You're not going to knock it out of the park like that. But on a worst case scenario, if you would have bought an E55, like a 2000 E55, a year ago for $4 grand, those are already back at 9 or 10 or 11 or 12.
Yeah,
easily.
That was the car that you kind of made me fall in love with last time we did this.
Yeah,
I'm still kind of kicking myself in the ass for not buying one because they were stupid cheap. Like to the point where it was like hilariously cheap.
I don't lie about this. This is like straight talk. Like BMW M5s, like I honestly hate that car, but they are so cheap.
Which one are we talking about here?
The V10. The V10. They're so cheap. even manuals are so cheap that it's crazy. Like if you
But
look
that's
at
just a game of roulette, right? What
it
problem
is a game of roulette. But if you wanted to own that car,
yeah.
I don't. I for me, it's not my jam. But those are going to go back up. So you got to think they're so rare that it's like I mentioned that. I think there's a lot of stuff like that. I just did that episode of my top 5, and my top 5 were, maybe I shouldn't give this away because you should watch my video. But I'll give you, like, the 2 bottom ones, honestly, are one is Land Rover Discoveries.
Mm-hmm.
You can still get those for nothing. Here's a good example. So the Land Rover Discovery is a great example. You can go on Facebook Marketplace and find a Land Rover Discovery for like $1,500.
To be clear, which one are we talking about? The one with that weird top corner window that pops out when you wheel it?
So there's a Series 1, a Series 2, and then a Series 2.5. Yeah. Honestly, all of them collective. Series 1s have already started to go up a little bit, so it's unlikely that you're going to find one of those for $1,500. But a Series 2, like a 99, 2000, there's still cheap ones out there. There's also ones you should definitely avoid. I mean, this is a car there's a lot of information on my video that, like, you need to check a lot of different systems out on that vehicle. You could totally hose yourself. If you don't know if you don't have a passion for that, you should not just go buy it.
Don't dive into the,
Yeah, but they're so cheap that and this is a good example. It's like 2 years ago, Land Cruisers, 96 Land Cruisers were like free. They were just absolutely free. But at the same time, you could see really nice ones selling for like 30. So anytime there's a disparity in the market where it's like, here's a car for $2,000, here's that same car for $20,000, that should tip you off that, like,
something's going on.
Now, yes, there's a difference between those two cars, but sometimes there's not. Sometimes you find rich guy that had that Discovery in his garage for the last 10 years. He's only had it serviced by Land Rover. There's no frame rust. Everything is perfect. And he's like, because Auto Trader and all KBB and all those are slow to update their money. So that car, if you look up the value, it's still $3,500 for a good condition SE7. Okay, well, I'll give you $3,500 for your mint condition truck. I'll drive it for a year, enjoy it, and sell it for $15,000. So that's one example, and that's an example that's cheap and available. Now, again, if you think Land Rovers are the worst vehicles ever made, and you're partially right, you should not look at that vehicle. My number 2 vehicle also is one of those cases where if you don't have a passion for this car, you should not necessarily go down this road, but it's the Volkswagen Corrado. The Volkswagen Corrado is real rare in the States. There's only like a few thousand G60s, and there's only a few thousand, I think maybe 4 or 5,000 VR6s ever, imported, total production. And they're really you're seeing that, like, $5,000 Corrado, $45,000 Corrado. And so, they're really the same car. Parts are fairly cheap for them. And as a collector car, I say this in the video, is like, I don't suggest that you go buy a Discovery or a Corrado and daily drive it. You should not do that. Both of those will break your heart. But as a car that you're going to either buy and enjoy, put a few hundred miles on a year, maybe even 1,000 miles a year, or just buy to flip, both of those are crazy good. There's a lot of money to be made on both of those now. So those are 2 examples, and they're a little bit out there. As far as other stuff that's coming down that maybe is more, that's newer, Mike mentions newer stuff. So I'll mention one that's way out there and similar to like a Ford Focus, but we never got that. And I don't know my Ford Focus generations, but what's the Colin McRae generation Ford Focus? Is that the first generation Ford Focus?
I don't know.
I'm bad with I apologize, Ford Focus fans, but those cars had in Europe, the RS was like a 5-cylinder turbo. Well, that same drivetrain got put in to the Volvo C30. I don't know if you're familiar with the Volvo C30. That car is a real crazy looking hatch. Yeah, the hatch is like flat and glass and real unique looking car. But those are manual transmission, 5-cylinder turbo. kind of cool cars. They make there's a lot of aftermarket parts for them, and they're, wholesale's like $3,000, retail's like $5,000 or $6,000. And that's a car that there's so few of them out there. And again, a lot of them were kind of disposable. Most of them were not manual transmission. So buying like a 60 or 70,000 mile one of those and holding on to it and just enjoying it, showing up at the Cars and Coffee in a car that no one else there has. The C30 is a weird, rare car. Having that 5-cylinder brap, with however you want to set it up, put an intake on it, throw some boost at it. That's a car that kept reasonably, stock or made into it. If it's not an R design or whatever that hot version was they made, that car probably will double in value over the next few years.
You think?
If not shorter time period, yeah.
Okay.
Because it's really...
See, I don't think a Volvo is like...
Well, they made, like, in the 80s and 90s, they made these Bertone coupes. And those really nice Bertone coupes are now, like, at RM auctions and, are
really?
doing real money. Again, this isn't a car I'm saying you're going to, like, buy a C30 and it's worth $50,000. But it is a car you can buy for really cheap, $5,000 or $6,000, and potentially own for a few years, maybe not spend. It's just like the third or fourth car, and sell it for $10,000, or even flip it in the short term for a little bit. So again, we're getting a little bit out of the field, but there's certain newer cars like that are nearing the bottom of their depreciation curve. Abarths, Fiat. At the beginning we were talking about these Fiat 500 Abarths. Those cars, they made a lot of them. They're Italian. I mean, clearly their Fiat Chrysler heritage is a little bit less Italian than it should be, but they're cool little cars. They sound cool. They're fun to drive. They're turbo. They're, I think all the Abarths are manual. And they're wholesale. I'm seeing them really stupid cheap, like 60, 70,000 miles and $3,000.
Woo.
So... you
golf
almost
cart money, man.
That's what I'm saying. You almost can't say no. Now, I'm not saying you're going to buy that and necessarily make money on it, but that is the bottom of the depreciation curve, and that car you're not going to lose that money, because if you bought that car new, say you really like that car and you bought one for $20,000. Well, it's $3,000 now. You just lost, a lot of money, $17,000. So
I guess the question in a situation like that would be like, will a car like that ever actually turn and go back up in value, or is it just bottomed out and that's the end of that car's life?
For sure, they will be worth money eventually on the long, but you're talking like 15 years. So I'm not suggesting, or maybe even longer than that, but maybe not. Maybe not, because it is a unique. That particular car is it's the first car that sort of rebirthed the Abarth name. That all of them are going to be destroyed by kids. So 10 years from now, there will be 16 left. And if you have a low miles original Abarth, that maybe even has a couple mods on it, I can totally see that car being a $20,000 car again, for sure. I'm not saying that.
And I've fallen into this, but there seems to be a difference between a collector car and a cult classic car. I give the example of the Abarth as like a car that in 10 years people are gonna be like, dude, I want one of those, but not willing to pay for it. I don't think it's not gonna be like 10 years.
And it's not gonna be a car that like. So what that car costs new, I don't think it's going to radically accelerate above what it costs new ever, even if there's only 16 left.
But what do you think?
I am saying that on the short term, there are it's an interesting car to have and enjoy. And it's a car that you won't necessarily lose your butt on because it's at the bottom of the depreciation curve. So again, there's like a short and a long. This is not a good example of a long. I bring those two particular cars up in that Mike was saying, like, what's a newer car that you can buy and that's going to be a collectible? Like a newer car that you could have bought that would be a collectible would be like the BMW 1M is a really good example. Those cars were $45,000 to $50,000 new. they have never gone below $45,000 or $50,000. And a good one is 70,000 still. So, and I can seriously see that car being not like one of the homologation cars from the 80s necessarily and being worth $200,000, but I can see that being almost like a Porsche GT3 where it just never depreciates.
Yeah, immediately just goes.
Yeah.
We had a friend that had one. That got
great
it.
Cars.
And never lost a cent on it. Just started making money from the second he got it. I was just gonna say I don't know if it's worth talking about, but it's interesting to me how there are a lot of those cars, and I've seemed to own them all the time that are just real cult classic cars. Mark I GTIs. Now I know those are going up, but hell, I owned one for 20 years. And I didn't get it till it was 16 years old. It never went up. The CRX is another one. Everybody wants that car. Nobody pays for the car. I feel like the Fiesta ST is going to go down that road. People will be like, man, that was such a neat car. You got one of those?
The CRX and the Rabbit are great examples of why I bring up the Abarth.
Really?
5
you got to wait for 40
5
years.
years ago, if you owned a GTI for 10 years, it was still worth what it was worth, what you paid, back in the day. GTIs now regularly, but it's particularly Mark I GTIs. If it's a Callaway, forget about it. But if it's those are worth whatever someone's willing to pay.
Right.
But consistently, Mark I and Mark II cars are in that $20,000, $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 range.
For pristine.
Not really. A lot of them, look at the Bring a Trailer ended. Like the Scirocco's are, most of those had 150, 160. E30 M3s are a great example. Those cars, there's one Top Gear Porsche has one right now. It's got 175,000 miles. They're asking 62. I mean, that car new. You're talking that though I bought an M3 E30, like a mint red M3 10 years ago for, what was it, 10 years ago? Maybe 12 years ago for 10 grand. I mean, so I would disagree on the I think every dog kind of does have its day, and when it's a unique, rare, enjoyable car. CRXs are another great example. Now yours is pretty modified, and so I don't know that like yours necessarily would fall into that category, but like a nice HF or a nice SI CRX is like stupid crazy money now. What I consider to be stupid crazy money. Like, do I think a CRX is worth 20 grand? Not really. Our CRX is fairly regularly. We just detailed one at the detail shop. We just detailed one, and I think he sold it for $35,000. It was a
what?
It was a SI, just an SI with like 90,000 miles.
So how'd you find the sucker?
Yeah,
I didn't buy this wasn't my car. This was a guy that brought it in to get a detail. Basically thought he was going to sell it and bring a trailer, but there's guys out there that just collect older Hondas, and it was probably the nicest CRX SI I had seen. This guy had also sold a real nice DX Civic. I mean, they aren't out there. So like if you want the world's nicest Scirocco.
I'm confused because maybe they're not out there in the snowy areas, but down here in the South, I can't go anywhere without seeing some guy go by in a 30-year-old Honda.
So probably what you need to do immediately is go on Bring a Trailer and look at completed auctions. They have.
I should start buying up all these little old Librarian Civics.
Yes, if you know where there's a 90,000 mile CRX SI that isn't rusty, that can be presented as a fairly original car, 1,000% it is real money car right now, and only going to go up. What's the ceiling? I don't know. Did I think that 911? I sold a 911 RS America that I loved, that I bought for $30,000. I sold it for $35 or $38. That car now is a $250,000 car all day long. Did I think that it would be $250,000? If we would have recorded this 6 years ago, I probably would have told you no.
Yeah.
I mean, that's such a stratospheric number. There's 911 turbos. A 911 turbo is going to break $1 million. And this is not like a, you talk about Lotuses, they made 367 Lotus S4Ss. Ferraris, F40s, they're making like 4 times that. But I don't know. There just seems to be no limit to what some of these collector cars are worth. And I know there's not exact correlation between CRX SI and F40, but there is a correlation in that kids longed to have, like, let's say an FDRX7. Supras are a great example. I mean, Supras are 2JZ Supras are so crazy. Original pristine manual transmission Supras are literally $100,000.
See,
that's crazy, right? I don't know. I mean, maybe it is.
The only curveball that I see in this, like, Japanese 80s and 90s collectability is that, especially when it comes to like the Hondas and stuff, they made so many of them.
I would agree.
And they made them, so good that, I mean, here we are. And like I said, maybe it's a regional thing and dependent on where you live and the weather conditions. But where I live, I see 30-year-old Hondas still very regularly. So I feel like, when people, like cars from the 60s, the European cars or whatever, like, they were mechanically pieces of finicky. We'll say finicky.
I like that.
Situations. So a lot of them didn't make as many of them, obviously, and then a lot of them, whatever, the mechanics weren't there, and so there's reasons why they became rare. There's reasons why they became these barn finds. Like, Hondas just keep kicking. So I think it's going to be 80 years before, like, they really... Now, yes, you're going to have your right-hand drive.
What's that Honda... see, this is bad, and probably not that many people are making it this deep in this podcast, so it's okay.
Yeah.
But what are the four-wheel drive, tall Honda... Civic, it's a Civic all-wheel drive.
Yeah,
like
wagon.
Yeah, those are starting to bring real money. I mean, there's all those cars are like regular Accord coupes, like 1986 or 1989 Accord coupes are starting to bring real money. I don't know what, if it's that so many are just trashed that when there's a nice one, I don't know.
Nostalgia.
I mean, just everything becomes somewhat collectible, and so I'm not. We've gotten into the weeds a little bit, maybe, but yeah. I mean, I feel like I don't know how to justify some of that stuff myself, but I do know that from being constantly watching auction results, constantly being at auctions, and kind of seeing where cars are going. I know that there's a huge difference in what a little small town, you drive through all these little towns in the United States, these small kind of rural places, and what you see, Starions and Conquests and 944s and all these cars for sale in these little regional places, for sale by owner, they're still 5 years ago money. And what they're selling for online or well presented at nice auctions is a night and day. I insure all my cars through Hagerty, and Hagerty has this thing online called it basically shows you kind of what cars are worth and what cars are projected to go up in value. And it's a great resource because it shows you, like, condition and kind of where the history of the car. It has good analytics and kind of where the cars are going. And you would be, go on Hagerty.com. It's shocking what a lot of these cars that we're talking about, like, and it could be anything, like 911 turbos or old Hondas. All of them are just, ratcheting up. And there's some cars that aren't, going to be good investments. I'm not saying that every car necessarily fits this, but you again, to get back to where we started,
Yeah.
You know, and I think some of it's condition. I mean, for me, I didn't love the Z31 300ZX, yet I own a Z31 300ZX. And it's because it was a roadside find, and it was one of those deals where, like, if I offer this guy X amount of dollars and it's so low, he takes it. I own a 300ZX, and now I own a 300ZX. And honestly, it's one of those cars that I never really liked, but now that I have it, it's so great.
Well, there's a lot of cars
thing is great.
Yeah, like there's so many cars out there that you kind of just didn't give a second thought to, but they end up becoming very definitive of the era. I think the Z31, and I've written about this in the magazine, it is like totally 80s. And we didn't realize it at the time because the Z32 came out and you're like, that's the one. Forget this last one. That's the one, because it was so polarizingly different, you know? They gave up they gave up all the angles. It went round. It went, you know, and so everybody forgot about the Z31. But now it's been long enough to where you're like, wow, that really was like a definitive.
Everything about that car. There's so many weird 80s things about it that I find it's so freaking charming. And my kid, who's now my oldest, he's now old enough to drive. It's of all the cars that I've got. Well, I wouldn't say it's his favorite, but there's something about that car that he always, like, if he's got a date or whatever, he wants to take that car. And the girls react to it, and it's like, it's a unique thing that's cheap. You can still get those cheap. And I see them like they're creeping up. And also, thanks to Japanese steel or whatever they were using at that time, most of those have rusted away. Most of those, I remember a guy that I worked for back in the late 90s, mid 90s. So at that point, he had an 87, so the car would have been 12 years old. The car was completely rusted out. The floors were rusted out. The sills were rusted out. The fender wells were rusted out. And he ended up junking that car in 98, 99.
Yeah.
And so I think that, you know, because of rust, a fair amount of those cars are gone. And it's kind of a bummer because, like you say, uniquely 80s. Honestly, there's so many. The velour in that car is the most 80s thing I've ever seen. The silver on like all the buttons, it's like a metallized.
Yeah.
It's so, you know, it's like one of those stereo receivers from that era was this like silver fake aluminum color. All the stuff, it's like so 80s it hurts. And that's the kind of stuff that is going to get valuable. Anything that like absolutely just immediately puts you back in that era of your youth or whatever, you know, even like down to trackers and little things, you know what I mean? Dude,
like
trackers are freaking awesome.
Yeah, I know. And they had the graphics, and they had, like, you see those things now and you're like, man.
I still look for trackers. Unfortunately, trackers are starting to, like, my buddy, I've got a house up in northern Michigan, and he keeps a tracker, like a 92 tracker up there, and it's red with pink and yellow graphics on the side of it. And it's got the drop top, manual transmission, all-wheel drive. And dude, that thing is a freaking party. It's just, it goes through sand, it hauls kayaks.
All those vehicles there was a unique time where like a lot of roofs came off. There was a lot of T-tops, like the Amigos and the Trackers and all the sports cars with the T-tops and the SUVs, like their first-gen 4Runners where the backs came off. And obviously...
The Isuzu Via-Cross.
Yeah,
that
nuts. That was like a concept car that they sold.
That they actually made. That thing
had
like 250 horsepower and like.
Yeah, it was like a fast.
It was cool. It was cool.
Interesting. But all right. Well, I don't know. We hit that hour mark. I guess we
went by quick.
People either really like this or they're like, man, I don't know. I mean, and I think if this clicks for one person. Like, they're going to walk up to one of us 5 years from now and just be like, thank you. You know, you know what I mean? Like, because if you really listen to this and you get it and you use your spidey sense.
Man, like, I feel like in the second half, we started trying to talk about like specific cars, but that's not it. We got to go back to the first half where you talk about the tingle and the feeling, and that's what you got to kind of follow because there are no rules to this. I mean,
There
there are cars that are obvious. It's like buy a 996 today if you ever want one.
Yeah.
Like that kind of a thing. But like, yeah, there's so many kind of outliers, that can be great.
Z32s, I think, still are still relatively cheap for what it is. So are like Dodge Stealths and Mitsubishi 3000 GTs and imported GTOs. Like those cars are, I think, undervalued relative to the Skylines and stuff like that. I also think like the Z30, so not the R31, the Paul Newman edition R31, which is kind of like before the R32. It's the more square Skyline.
Yeah,
those are like limited edition cool cars, and they're like still cheap relative to where like a good R32. There's a ton, like hundreds of crappy R32s that have been imported that are like $15,000. Like avoid those like the plague. But really good R32s. I mean, I've seen numerous really low mile V-Spec or really low mile just R32 Skylines bring like big money at like actual collector car auctions over the past really year and a half to 2 years. And I don't see those going. I mean, I think that really good R32 Skylines, just like, any of those super iconic cars, I don't think there's really a ceiling. In the same way that there hasn't been for 911s. It's a different, the climb rate might be different. But if you think about 911s are not rare cars. Whereas, a lot of these other manufacturers, even like S2000s are rarer than some Ferraris. And, AP1 S2000s, I've been trying to buy a really rare, like Suzuka Blue, I think is the one to have, the 02 last year, the AP1.
Suzuka Blue?
Yeah, they only made it in 02. The AP1
I always thought that was undesirable. Huh.
They only made it for 02. Blue on blue, low miles. I think is like a serious collectible.
Okay.
Collectible car, because they're you can still find them in the low teens, maybe mid-teens, and I think that car is headed to 25-30 grand. That's one that you could short or long. That car could be a long term. There's so few, and because of the mod scene on those cars, like it's a great car to mod. Like it's a great car to make 500 horsepower out of. And if you don't totally chop up the frame and don't do the stance thing, and you can still keep the fenders alive, that car could potentially be a car you really enjoy for 10 years and then sell for 40 or something, So
cool,
man. We keep going back to the 996 as kind of the obvious one for sports car guys. How long until you think those really kind of pop and start shooting up?
Turbos, so regular 996s a year ago. I had a friend that's a car dealer that does kind of what I do, but he's more of a car dealer than I am. He had 3 996s. He paid no more than 12 for any of them. Mm-hmm. He sold them all. You cannot get a nice 996 for 12 grand anymore. They are the bottom now is kind of like 17 for a nice 996, and they're on the climb. Turbos a year and a half ago at auction were in the high 20s. Turbos now at auction are 40 in a year. Man. And those turbos, because if you think about it, I mean, you can make those like borderline Veyron fast. I mean, there's if it's an X50 car, you can get easy 700 horsepower out of that car with bolt-ons. There's not many cars that are all-wheel drive, 700 horsepower, pretty reliable. They have the Metzger, twin turbo. That's a serious piece of kit. And there are really nice ones are already tracking over 50. If it goes like the 996, everyone's over the headlight thing now. What 996s forever was like, oh, the headlights. And unfortunately, Magnus Walker's onto these things now. And so you've got the intelligentsia now sort of like preaching how awesome 996s are.
Yeah.
Jethro Bovingdon did a video about a year ago about how awesome his 150,000 mile 996 was. He writes for Evo.
I always said the things that people criticized about the 996 were going to be the exact things they praised, like the headlights. Well,
headlights
all of a sudden, those ugly headlights become the unique headlights. All of a sudden, oh, that's the first water cool becomes, wait, that's the first of the water cool generation. Now this is valuable. You know, it's like you guys are all.
The funny thing about the headlights, I almost wish you can't really. You wish you could drag someone from like 2010 to here and be like, look, you fool. The early headlights. People love the early headlights now. Like the true purists love the first generation, like the launch edition Boxster, the silver and red. All of a sudden are bringing like real money. They're not fast, but they're cool. You know what I mean? Same thing with the 996s is like the early C2 996s and early turbo 996s. People all of a sudden are like, oh yeah, that's a cool car. Oh yeah, that car shouldn't be 15 grand. Mm-hmm. I'll take 3. Mm-hmm. So, and the bad news is for those of us who could have had it, were we not, is they will not be 15 grand for much longer. So
what ticks me off about the 996 is I knew that, like when everybody was still whining about the headlights and the water cool, I was like, man, I wish I could do it, because I knew I was going to do it. And then, Magnus gets one, and you're like, watch all this.
And he's dragging up the value so hard. Like that
stop, Magnus.
He's got the Aero spec. His red one is an Aero 9961. And Aero 9961s, like literally one just sold on eBay. A normally aspirated 996 with like 80,000 miles sold for $29,000. So, I mean, that's not like crazy money, but at the same time, that car 2 years ago was a $16,000 car, and it was, even if it was one of the nicest, So
yeah, it hurts.
Yeah,
it does. It does. I don't currently have a 996, and my video on the 996 didn't help anything. In fact, when I published my video on the 996, which basically was like, hey people, buy 996s right now. Everyone that had the wanted 996 was like, man, you should not have posted this video. Like, don't tell anyone. Like, we're saving right now. I want to get a 996.
I remember I was in Monterey for the car weekend, and a friend of mine was like, yeah, Magnus just got a 996. I was like, dang, shut the window on me. Like that. There it went.
Well, when he bought 944, when he got his 944, 944s were undervalued and disrespected for so long. And you drive even a regular 944, and you're like, man, this is a pretty cool car. Then you drive like an S2. I don't think people realize how cool. Like the S2 is like one of the rarest 944s. It has a 3-liter 4-cylinder.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, giant 4-cylinder. But like you were telling me the other day, you're like, Porsche's big problem is if it ain't a 911. Then people just, but it's not a 911.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Think about another car company that has that issue. No matter what they make, no matter how cool it is, but it's not a 911 or it's not a 911. It's like, but a Boxster, granted, it's not a 911 and it's got a stupid emasculating name, or whatever, but like, it is a very pure to what the early 911s were type of car. I mean, it is a cool
Boxsters are great. The funny thing about Boxsters, and I've seen a couple people talk about this, and I'm reluctant to really make this statement too, is Boxsters, more so than the 944s, and like 914s were not loved when they were out.
At all.
Were not loved until about 3 years ago. Now 914 prices are absolutely ridiculous. 914s are slow. They're rusty. Like it's not a car you should be spending $50,000 for. Yet people are. So with the 944, it's like, well, the 944 is like a good car. The 968 was a pretty good car. The 928 is like a good car. Yeah. So there's
that
so
one will
many.
You too, right?
It's an expensive car to maintain, but I think again the Magnus Walkers are sort of bringing the best 928. Is like the first 928, the 79, 78, 79, 80, is like there's no, a lot of the crap that they added onto it that broke isn't on that car.
It's
and
later.
it's lighter, and more of them are manual, which is a pretty special thing. And so, yeah, you can buy those. And the reality is, it's a Porsche. It's going to be, I mean, I promise you 928s are going to start bringing stupid money. And then GTSs already are, early 79s, because of, again, these guys like Magnus Walker that, you know, once they say something, it becomes the truth. You know, early 928s, the it's kind of out that like early 928s are pretty freaking great. So
how do you think the Magnus Walkers, when I say that, I mean the influencers, because I'm sure there's one for every for every brand or whatever.
Yeah.
How is that going to change the collecting game? You know what I mean? Because like that's something that as we were kids, like there wasn't the internet. You know what I mean? That spread stuff like wildfire. There weren't influencers like there are today. There weren't the Magnus Walkers to be like, oh my God, Magnus Walker just bought a 944. We all got to go buy now, and now the price went up. You know, it's just like.
I feel like if you have your hand on the pulse there, then it can really help you as a collector because it'll make the appreciation happen faster.
That's true. Because it does. It
has helped
like
me with no one talking about Lotus Esprits and me loving Lotus Esprit. Like, I am not kidding when I said a Lotus Esprit is like one of the best exotic cars of the era. If you drive it back to back with a 348 or a 355, 355 is pretty good, but if you drive it against the 348 and a 911 of that era, I choose the Esprit every time. Now, I know the Esprit might not be for everybody, but in terms of like rarity, like most people haven't even ever seen one in real life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, it's a really rare car. And it's a car that
I think that's the problem with it is not enough people have touched it, lusted after it, written about it, dreamt about it, you know, like, so it's
but
just,
in the 80s, this
there.
is a 4-second 0 to 60 car in the 80s. I mean, it's like, it's mind-bending to think about, like, you know, built by hand and all this stuff. And it's like, I do think that, you know, the reason I was able to sell the V8, you know, is people, you see that video of that car and you're like, oh my God, the V8 is an awesome car. All of a sudden you're like, I never realized the Lotus Esprit is an awesome car. This similar car, you know, from Ferrari is selling for 20 times as much. I want to get a Lotus Esprit. Well, the next thing you know, there's not very many of them. There's 300 S4Ss. So like 300 people decide they really want a Lotus.
Yeah.
That's all of them. They're all gone.
That's it. Yeah.
So, yeah, what does that do to the price? That's why with Magnus Walker, I think, you know, with some of the cars that he's done, particularly there's a cumulative effect with 911s. Like you've got the Singer, you know, unique, bespoke kind of thing where people are building 911s, really rich guys are building 911s for $1 million or for $1.5 million. That really it's just in the details, sort of like a Bentley where someone spent a week quilting this seat. I mean, if you really get off on that, okay, that's the best 911. To me, is the Singer 911 drastically better than your 911? I mean, in some ways, well,
every way.
So I haven't driven your 911.
Correct.
But is it better than in a nice original Euro spec 911?
It's like you're saying, there's two different kinds of Porsche guys. You know, there's the guy that lusts after the Porsche, and then there's Porsche weenies, and then there's pristine Porsches, and then there's the Magnus Porsches. I'm not saying that his aren't pristine, but like
no, they aren't. He drives all
look
of his
at
cars.
Magnus, and I know he's my you know, brother in dread and all that kind of stuff. But like you look at Magnus, you look at the cars, you look that they have mileage and chips on them, and it's everything that you're like, yes, that's what the 911 is supposed to be. That's what real sports car is supposed to be. This guy doesn't play by the rules. He lives his own life. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't conform to all that kind of stuff. It's the same thing. He brings out that nature of the car, you know, and lets people see that kind of outlaw side of it. Funny how he kind of owns that word outlaw now, but
yeah, that's weird.
Yeah.
And it's like, he has absconded with the Hoyer logo.
Yeah.
I mean, he literally took the Hoyer logo, put the word outlaw on it, and somehow that's not an infringement, and no one has a problem with that. I mean,
but
more power to him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not hating. He kind of, I don't know, man. Like, he was just the right image at the right time with that.
He's a
car.
super cool guy.
I've heard nothing but awesome things. It sucks because I've been in the same place as him a few times, from Monterey to SEMA or whatever. But because of my hair, I just cannot go introduce myself because I'm just going to end up being like, I have dreads too. I have a Porsche too. It's good to meet you, man.
We talked about Lotuses. He likes Lotuses. He's a Lotus aficionado.
Yeah, well, he's British.
Yeah. His girl they bought an S1. They have the S1, and the prices have, I don't know if it's because he bought one, but like all the right people have bought the first gen Esprits, and they went from like 15,000 forever to like 100,000. Yeah. So
Magnus, I'm gonna need you to buy a CRX and a ST.
It needs to be Smurf blue with like a bunch of bass boat sparkles in it.
And get on that.
No interior.
Tomorrow, if on his channel he's like, I'm gonna tell you the truth. You gotta get a CRX. You know, everybody buys a CRX. Everybody buys a CRX. You know,
that's why I could never be a Magnus Walker, because I do that. I just try and screw with people and see what they'd actually buy. It's like today I bought a Daihatsu. And then just go watch everybody buy.
You got to dig deep for the cool Daihatsu, that's for sure.
All right, well, this is, we've said everything.
We said it all.
Mike,
you want to wrap it up?
Nah. I learned a lot in this one. I was kind of quiet on this one.
Wrap it up.
He's taking notes.
It's like Jonathan, freaking kids, man.
Jonathan was not taking notes.
No, I'm the guy in the river just tubing down the thing, man. Just going, hey, look at that. That's neat. We should go over there.
I need 30% more of that in my life, for sure.
I need about 90% more financial responsibility.
Well.
I
guess that's what I'm here for.
I'm just as God made me.
I love it.
All right. See you guys.
See ya, S3.
Oh, wait. Close. We got to close. Subscribe to our things. Whatever.
Buy the magazine. Subscribe to the magazine. Dude, the magazine, I've been telling these guys, let me do an S3 pitch for a second here. Let me take my hood back off. That was kind of...
No, yeah, leave the hood on it.
Dude, listen. These guys are selling their magazine way too cheap. I look at the sticker price of this magazine, and I ended up writing for S3, honestly, because I was such a big fan of Jonathan. Is one of the few people that writes from his heart. You know, there's so much, game playing or not even game playing, but like trying to get into the industry and writing what you think people want to hear. And he does none of that. And it's true, objective, beautiful, passionate automotive journalism, which is what automotive journalism used to be. And so S3, we're kind of fortunate because I feel like all the good magazines that were, like 15 years ago have kind of gone, are not made anymore. And so S3 is sort of like the lone standout. And so even though I write for the magazine, like I come to it as an aficionado of the magazine, it is so cheap to subscribe. I always see deals like right now they're giving a T-shirt with the thing. If you believe in print at all, and you believe in the passion that we believe in, just subscribe to keep the print alive. So yeah. I mean, if I could say that.
Like Nad said, Nad's from Hoonigan now, and he was the editor in Super Street in the heyday of Super Street, like when it was really up. And he was like, it's not even about support print. He's like, F that. It's about support real media. So whether printed in a magazine or it's on a YouTube channel or whatever, like, you just got to support, like, you can tell who, like, the passionate dudes are. That's why our magazine's so cheap, because we just want people to read it, man. We just want people to connect with it, So we can't,
subscribe now, because I'm keep telling them to raise the price. So get on before
we're at the bottom of the depreciation curve right now. it's gonna skyrocket.
They're like, wait, we should
$100 for a subscription.
We should be charging. Hey, I subscribe to magazines that are more than that annually.
I know.
Because I've had an Evo subscription forever, and
yep. But see, it's what we're talking about, man. You just got to live it. Like the more that I had somebody tell me, man, how you always get these deals on these cars, and it's because I literally am always involved and engaged in this stuff, and deals come your way. It just does. Stuff comes your. The more you guys read or watch, the more you soak up, man. And then, the more the tingle, it goes back to the tingle. When, the more you kind of work that muscle, and then when it starts going, you just know, man, it's time to buy, or it's time to do something, or sell, or modify, or whatever it is. But
when you get that feeling in your pee-pee, just go
you get the Peter tingle.
That's your best interest at heart.
It's no joke.
Not.
It's not at all.
All right. Well, that was a hell of a closure. So thank you for that, for the compliments. And I guess we'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Bye.
All right, later, dudes.
See you guys.